In the winter of 1976, deep in the frozen wilderness of Yosemite National Park, a group of climbers stumbled upon a wrecked aircraft buried beneath the ice. What they found inside would ignite a wave of secrecy, greed, and legend that still echoes through the granite walls of Camp 4 to this day. This story is based entirely on real events. No details have been fictionalized. Names, dates, and locations remain as they were recorded in reports, archives, and testimonies of those who were there. Yosemite Valley. Late December, 1976. The air was thinner than usual, dry and still as though the entire Sierra Nevada was holding its breath. Winter had descended hard and early. The towering granite walls of El Capitan and Half Dome were crusted with ice and snow, casting ghostly shadows across the valley floor. Camp 4 was nearly empty. Only a few climbers remained, mostly dirtbags tough enough or desperate enough to weather the cold for the sake of solitude, peace, or pure obsession. Among them was Dale Bard, 22 years old, mop of black hair and hands like worn leather. He lived cheap, climbed hard, and trusted no one but his belayer. That morning, he zipped up a ragged down jacket and stepped out into the crisp light, boots crunching in the snow. A rumor had started circling 2 days before, passed around the smoldering wood stove like myth. Some said they saw wreckage, a piece of metal wing protruding from a frozen lake deep in the backcountry. No one was sure where or when, but someone had whispered it came from Lower Merced Pass Lake. Dale didn't think much of it. Yosemite was full of ghosts, of lost hikers, downed planes, even gold miners who vanished with their mules. Still, it was strange. That kind of rumor didn't just surface without reason. Later that day in the lodge cafeteria, a ranger named Steve dropped a comment too casual to be accidental. "Real remote out there this time of year. Nobody gets in or out without snowshoes, not unless you're flying." That stuck with Dale. He'd been up around Merced Pass before, back when the snow was dry powder and the trail markers still visible. It was wilderness, in the purest sense. If a plane had gone down there, it wouldn't be found until spring, if ever. But that night, as the storm clouds cleared and the stars returned, Dale couldn't sleep. Something about the whole thing felt off. He wasn't the only one. 2 bunks down, another climber named Jimmy Chin, no relation to the future filmmaker, was lacing his boots in the dark. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" he whispered. "If you're thinking frozen lake, long hike, maybe something worth finding," Dale replied. Jimmy nodded once. "Leave before dawn." They didn't tell anyone else. The hike was brutal. 30 miles in deep snow, no trail, no sun, just the white silence of the high Sierra and the echo of their own breathing. They carried crampons, axes, a tiny camp stove, and enough instant oatmeal to last 5 days. 3 days later, wind-burned and exhausted, they reached Lower Merced Pass Lake. It was frozen over, silent, and vast. Trees bowed under snowdrifts. There were no signs of movement except one. Near the far edge, a jagged piece of aluminum pierced through the ice like a torn blade. They stood in silence. The shape was unmistakable, the wing of a twin-prop aircraft, frosted over, splintered open, and half submerged. Snow covered the rest. Dale moved closer, heart pounding. The fuselage was still buried beneath the lake, but the wing had writing near its edge. He brushed away the frost. Howard 500. Jimmy let out a low whistle. "This is recent, like very recent." They knew what it meant. A crash this remote, this quiet, with no search party, no headlines, and no chatter from the rangers. It wasn't just an accident. Something was off. Then Dale spotted something else. Canvas duffel bags frozen just under the surface, visible through the clear ice. Too many for passengers. They looked at each other. "Is that what I think it is?" Jimmy asked. Dale swallowed. "Looks like someone was hauling illegal cargo." The sun was going down fast and the temperature with it. They made camp on a ridge nearby, silent, restless, and surrounded by the weight of what they'd found. Tomorrow they'd dig. And the story, one that would ripple through the park, through ranger stations, newspapers, and DEA offices, was only just beginning. The sun cracked over the ridge in brittle orange light. The alpine air, sharp and still, pressed against their faces as Dale and Jimmy knelt beside the ice. Their breath puffed in white clouds. Neither spoke much. The silence wasn't fear, it was reverence. Something heavy and real lay beneath their boots. Jimmy chipped at the edge with his ice axe. The surface cracked like glass. Beneath, trapped in perfect clarity, lay canvas bags, rectangular, uniform, tightly packed. Not luggage, not survival gear, no signs of passengers, just cargo. They worked in shifts, alternating between chopping and warming fingers over a tiny camping stove. By mid-morning, they had one bag free. The thing was frozen solid. Dale dragged it to the surface, sweat freezing against his skin. It was heavier than he expected, fabric stiff with ice. He slit a seam. Inside, bundles, wrapped in layers of plastic and tape. No markings, no tags, just tight, dense bricks of mystery. Jimmy gave a low whistle. "How many bags are down there?" "Dozens," Dale muttered. "At least." They sat with it a long time, no birds, no wind, just the whisper of trees far beyond the lake. Jimmy finally spoke. "You realize this could be worth a fortune." Dale didn't answer. He looked out across the lake, eyes narrowed. That afternoon, they cataloged what they could see, 13 bags visible in the clear ice, probably more below the snow. One wing, part of the tail section, some broken instruments. No sign of bodies, no wreckage trail. It was like the plane had fallen straight from the sky and disappeared into the lake. Dale inspected the wing again. The registration number was visible, frost flaking off as he traced the metal with his glove. N500AT. "I've seen this kind of plane before," Jimmy said. "Howard 500s. Used to haul cargo. Sometimes VIPS. This one looks gutted. No seats." They made notes, took no pictures. Neither carried a camera. This wasn't about documentation. It was about figuring out what the hell they were standing on. As night fell, they pulled the salvaged bag into their tent. The stove hissed and popped, throwing weak warmth into the nylon bubble. Jimmy stared at the bricks inside the bag. "What do you think's gonna happen if people find out?" "They will," Dale replied. "Someone always talks." Jimmy nodded. "You think we take this back?" "Hell no. Not yet." They resealed the bag and shoved it behind their packs. The next morning, fresh snow coated everything. The lake was smooth again, the wreckage barely visible. Nature trying to hide the secret once more. They began the long hike out, marking a tree with a bootlace on their way out. Their footprints would be gone by evening. As they descended, they passed 3 climbers heading in. 2 men, 1 woman, all smiles, ice axes, and thick jackets. "Heading up to the pass?" Dale asked. "Trying to," one said. "Heard it's pristine this time of year." Dale exchanged a glance with Jimmy. "Be safe," Jimmy said. They didn't mention the plane, not yet, but the seed was already spreading. Back at Camp 4, word was moving faster than they expected. Around the stove, climbers talked in hushed tones. "Some guy said he saw something up by Merced Pass, like a wing, a big one. They're saying it's from a cargo plane, maybe military." Dale and Jimmy said nothing, but it was clear. The lake wouldn't stay quiet for long. That night, a knock came at their tent. It was a guy from Oregon, long red hair, knuckles black from ice. "You 2 were up north, right?" he asked. "You see anything weird?" Jimmy blinked. "Just snow and trees." The guy smiled. "Right. That's what I figured." As he left, Dale whispered, "They know." "Yeah," Jimmy said. "They just don't know how much yet." The forest was about to get crowded. The next morning, Camp 4 didn't feel the same. Jimmy noticed it first, the subtle shift in energy. Conversations paused when someone walked by. A few new faces loitered around the communal stove, dressed a little too clean, boots a little too new. Outsiders. They weren't climbers. Not really. Not in the Camp 4 sense of the word. "You see that guy with the nylon gaiters?" Jimmy whispered to Dale. "He asked me how to get to Merced Pass. Said he was just curious." Dale grunted. "They're already heading out there." Word had spread just like they feared. Someone had talked. Or maybe someone had followed. Either way, the wilderness wasn't going to stay quiet. And the lake? It wouldn't stay buried. That afternoon, a group of 6 left camp headed north. They were loud, laughing, sharing a flask, climbers in appearance only. 2 of them wore mirrored aviators, one carried a small hatchet strapped to his thigh. "They're not here to climb," Dale muttered. "Nope," Jimmy said. They're hunting." By day 3, Camp 4 had split into factions. There were the true climbers like Dale, Jimmy, and a handful of regulars who'd wintered through multiple seasons. Then there were the opportunists, the ones drawn by rumor. They pretended to be climbers, but packed too much gear, asked too many questions, and stared too long at the map board near the ranger station. And finally, the ghosts, men who showed up without names, stayed to themselves, and disappeared into the woods without a trace. Dale saw one of them counting bills behind a pine tree. Another used a satellite radio no one recognized. The park rangers hadn't acted yet. Officially, there was no crash, no report, no evidence. But whispers reached them too. A tall ranger named Butch Farabee, well known for his backcountry rescues, was seen loading extra supplies into his vehicle. Not the usual kind either: chainsaws, ropes, diving gear. Jimmy tried to play it cool. He stopped hanging around the stove and spent his afternoons bouldering near Happy Isles. But people kept coming up to him. "You hear about the wreck? You know where the ice is thinner? Someone said you and your buddy saw it first." He denied everything, smiled, walked away. But it didn't matter. The narrative had already taken hold. They were the first. And now, they were targets. One night, Dale returned to their tent to find it unzipped. Nothing stolen, but everything touched. His boots had been moved, his sleeping bag unrolled. "They're looking for the bag," he said. Jimmy cursed under his breath. "We should have buried it. Too late now." They repacked their gear that night, moved camp deeper into the trees, built no fire, said nothing for hours. The silence was no longer reverent, it was defensive. By week's end, the first real confrontation happened. A solo climber, Jason, from Colorado, returned from Merced Pass with a bruised jaw and a torn pack. "Saw 4 guys digging near the lake," he told a gathered group. "Told me to mind my business. One of them had a gun." The word hit Camp 4 like a lightning strike. A gun in Yosemite? That was unheard of. Most of the climbers didn't even carry knives. It wasn't that kind of place. Now it was. Jimmy pulled Dale aside. "If people are pulling weapons, this is going to get bad." Dale nodded. "We either disappear this door or we do something first." "What?" "We go back, get the rest, whatever we can carry, then we're done." Jimmy stared at him for a long time. Then, finally, "One last trip." They shook hands. No words, just resolve. They left before dawn, no map, no trail, and carrying nothing but crampons, tarps, and an empty sled Dale had stolen from behind a maintenance shed. Their goal wasn't glory. It was closure. It took them 2 days to reach the lake this time. Tracks crisscrossed the snow. Others had been there. A fire pit, still warm. Broken branches, signs of hurried digging. The wing was still visible, but several bags were gone. Dale didn't speak. He stepped onto the ice and started chopping. They worked in shifts again, silence and urgency their only rhythm. This wasn't discovery anymore. This was survival. By nightfall, they had 5 bags. They wrapped them in tarp, strapped them to the sled, and pulled west, moving slowly, silently, away from the site. They didn't camp. They didn't rest. They walked until their legs buckled. 2 more days through powder and bone-deep cold, then the silhouette of the valley rose before them like salvation. Camp 4 was quiet when they returned. Too quiet. They stashed the bags in a hollow beneath an old tree near the river, marked it with a pine cone tied to string. Then they returned to camp, nodding at familiar faces, pretending like nothing had changed. But everything had. By the time Dale and Jimmy woke the next morning, the smoke had already started to drift through the tree line. Not the clean wood smoke of a campfire. No, this was darker, bitter, chemical. Someone had lit something they shouldn't have. As they crept closer to the edge of camp, they found the source. A clearing near the river, blackened earth, a ring of stones where something large had burned overnight. And near it, a familiar smell. Melted tarp. Dale crouched near the ashes and sifted a handful through his fingers. "Somebody tried to destroy a stash," he muttered. Jimmy stood a few feet back watching the woods. "Or cover their tracks." A few others had gathered, all wide-eyed and tight-lipped. No one said who'd done it, but everyone knew what had been there. Camp 4 was tense. Rangers had started making regular visits, far more than usual. They didn't ask questions directly, but their eyes said plenty. Uniforms were sharper, hands rested closer to belts. Butch Farabee came by and stood by the map board for 20 minutes, silently watching as climbers milled around. When someone asked him about rescue operations, he only said, "We're prepping for ice extractions in the high country, that's all." But no one missed the meaning. Meanwhile, the opportunists kept coming. Jimmy counted at least 15 new arrivals in one afternoon. Men in thick coats, women with military-style packs. They didn't bring ropes. They didn't ask about climbs, just trail access. That night, Jimmy and Dale sat by the fire with only two others. Marcus, a wiry guy from Taos, and Lisa, a climber with frostbitten fingers and a stare like sharpened glass. They shared a dented pot of beans and didn't speak until it was empty. "You know they're armed," Lisa said finally. Dale nodded. "And they're not just weekend warriors," Marcus added. "They're ex-military. I'd bet on it." Jimmy stirred the fire. Sparks rose like fireflies. "What the hell were they hauling in that plane?" Lisa whispered. No one answered. They all knew it wasn't just the bags, it was the silence afterward, the lack of response, no news, no announcements, just a spreading awareness that something big had gone wrong and someone didn't want it found. 2 days later, a patrol helicopter circled the valley, low, slow, lingering. It hovered near Merced Pass, then veered off. But that was enough. Dale knew the place had been found. They didn't have much time. He and Jimmy returned to their stash the next morning. It was still there, 5 bags hidden beneath layers of pine and snow. But the ground was softer now, warmer. Spring was creeping in. The ice wouldn't hold for much longer. "What do we do with it?" Jimmy asked. "Move it again?" "Number that won't stop them. We bury it, or we make it disappear." Dale looked at the river. They spent the next 6 hours dragging the tarp-wrapped bundles upstream. Far enough from camp, away from the trails. Then, using ice axes and flat stones, they dug into the riverbank deep under a fallen tree, packed the cargo inside, covered it with brush, snow, and soil. No markings, no signs. When they finished, Jimmy dropped a single pine cone on top. Dale chuckled. "What is it with you and pine cones?" "They're better than breadcrumbs." Back in camp, tensions were boiling. 2 climbers fought near the stove, shouts, then fists. One accused the other of stealing gear. Others claimed someone was feeding information to Rangers. Lisa had vanished. Her tent was still there, her gear untouched, but no one had seen her for 2 days. At midnight, another fire broke out, this time in the eastern woods. Not an accident. Someone torched an entire lean-to. Dale saw shadows running through the trees, heard shouting. He and Jimmy didn't wait. They packed up their tent in silence and moved to higher ground, set up a new camp 2 miles west by the base of an old moraine. They were done waiting. The next day they would hike out of the valley, leave Yosemite for good. Let others chase myths and dig through snow. Let the park close around the silence, but fate had other plans. As dawn broke, they were already on the trail, packs full, faces hollow from exhaustion. But just as they reached the first ridge, a sound split the air. Engines, multiple vehicles off-road. Approaching fast from the ranger station, Dale pulled Jimmy into the brush. 3 black trucks roared up the fire road, unmarked but unmistakable. Men with radios, sidearms, and high-altitude gear poured out. Not rangers, not tourists, federal. They watched as the team fanned out into the woods, setting up temporary barriers and hauling gear. One carried a large map. Jimmy pointed. "They're going to the lake." Dale didn't move. "They know everything." He reached into his pack and pulled out the journal where he'd been writing everything since the crash. Names, coordinates, times. He looked at it for a long time. Then he tossed it into the brush. It was no longer their story to tell. They didn't speak on the way back. Dale and Jimmy moved through the forest like ghosts, keeping low, avoiding the roads. The trucks and men in black had arrived like thunder and left a silence even heavier than before. Camp 4 had changed. No longer a refuge for misfits and climbers, now it felt watched, occupied. They didn't go back to camp. They veered west, following deer trails and old game paths, finally setting up beneath a cluster of sugar pines. They pitched no tent. They cooked no fire. They just sat in the dark, the only sound the low whistle of wind through the needles. "They're digging," Jimmy whispered. "Yeah." "Think they'll find the rest?" "I don't know." They sat in silence. Jimmy finally said, "I miss the quiet before this." Dale nodded. "We ruined it, all of us." The next day, they hiked to a ridge overlooking the Merced drainage. From the rocks, they had a clear line of sight down toward the lake. What they saw chilled them. A full excavation site, generators, floodlights, tents, uniformed teams hauling ice blocks with chainsaws and pulley rigs. Drones buzzed overhead. There were even dogs, trained, sleek, and silent. "Jesus," Jimmy murmured. They knew exactly where to go. Dale scanned the perimeter. It wasn't just extraction, it was control. Men walked perimeter lines with radios. Others documented every bag, every scrap. 2 bodies were loaded into black plastic and lifted by helicopter. The pilot and passenger. They watched in stunned silence. "We were first," Jimmy whispered, "but it doesn't matter now." "No," Dale said. "Now it belongs to someone else." Back near the valley, rumors bloomed like wildflowers in spring. Some climbers said it was a CIA operation. Others swore it was cartel money. A few believed the crash had nothing to do with cargo at all, that it was a diversion for something buried deeper, older. But most just kept their heads down. Park rangers had become shadows, quiet, quick, watching everything. Conversations dried up, campfires burned low, the climbing walls stood silent and bare. Nobody felt like summiting anything anymore. One morning, Jimmy awoke to find a slip of paper tucked in his boot. No handwriting, just a set of numbers. 37.647, negative 119.459. A coordinate. Dale stared at it. "That's near Red Peak, north face." "You think it's from them?" "Number 2 risky. Might be Lisa." Lisa, still missing. They waited until dusk to move, crossed the river, skirted granite ledges, and climbed to the base of Red Peak under cover of moonlight. The snow here was patchy, the wind dry. No prints, no noise, just a small cairn, a rock pile topped with a pine cone. "She's alive," Dale whispered. Beneath the rocks, wrapped in waxed canvas, was a small notebook. Jimmy opened it carefully. Inside, sketches of aircraft parts, trail maps, dates, observations, a detailed log. And at the end, a short message. "They're not looking for what crashed. They're looking for who sent it." They stared at the words. "This was bigger than we thought," Jimmy said. "Way bigger." They packed up the notebook and covered the cairn. No need to disturb the rest. That night, under the stars, Dale laid awake. He remembered the first climb he ever did, a short route in Joshua Tree. He was 16, no rope, just youth, heat, and the kind of recklessness that looks like courage. Back then, he thought the danger was the point, the edge, the drop. Now he knew better. The real danger wasn't falling. It was finding something you couldn't explain and realizing the fall had already begun. He turned to Jimmy. "We leave tomorrow, this time for real." "Yeah. Burn the maps, ditch the gear." "And the notebook?" Dale hesitated. "We bury it somewhere no one goes." Before sunrise, they made one final trek, northwest, toward an unnamed glacial basin. No trails, no markers, just stone and wind and isolation. There, beneath a crooked pine growing out of solid granite, they dug a shallow grave and placed the notebook inside. Dale whispered something neither of them repeated. As they climbed out of the basin, snow began to fall, light, dry flakes, covering tracks, erasing signs. By the time they reached the road to Mariposa, everything behind them had vanished. They didn't look back. The road to Mariposa was empty. Dale and Jimmy walked without speaking, packs lighter than ever, eyes constantly checking the tree line. No vehicles, no sound, just the slow crunch of boots on thawing gravel. At the old gas station near Highway 140, a dusty pickup idled behind the pump. An old man in a brown jacket leaned on the hood, chewing a toothpick. His eyes lingered on them too long. "Long hike?" he asked, voice like rusted metal. "Long enough," Dale replied, not slowing. The man said nothing else, just watched them pass. Mariposa had changed too. The little town, usually quiet even in summer, now held a tension that didn't fit its population. Military-style vehicles parked near the ranger station, men in plain clothes walking in pairs, talking into radios. Windows shuttered on buildings that had been open last week. At the diner, they ordered coffee and eggs. The waitress brought it with a tight smile and a slip of paper tucked under the napkin. It read, "Don't talk here, they're listening." Jimmy didn't touch the food. Dale left cash and walked out. They took a side road out of town, found an abandoned cabin in the foothills, and holed up for the night. No lights, no fire. Just the creak of settling wood and the constant itch of being watched. Dale kept thinking about the notebook. Lisa's message had cracked something open. They're not looking for what crashed. They're looking for who sent it. Who sent it? The plane had come from Mexico, that much was clear. But why fly a Howard 500 across remote terrain, overloaded, in winter without clearance? The registration number N500AT had turned up nothing in any FAA records Jimmy checked before they left the valley. The model was legitimate, but the tail number? Fabricated, fake, which meant someone had spent a lot of time and money making sure that flight didn't exist. And now, federal agents were hauling ice by the ton to recover cargo that never existed. In the early hours before dawn, headlights flashed across the cabin wall. Dale and Jimmy were already awake. They slipped out the back, ran across the ridge, and dove into a gully. The vehicle, a black SUV, rolled slowly down the road, then stopped. A man stepped out, not in uniform, not local. He walked to the cabin, looked inside, then walked back. No words, no flashlight, just observation. Then he drove away. Dale exhaled. "They're not searching," he said. "They're sweeping, mapping, making sure no one talks." Jimmy stared up at the stars. "We need to disappear." They made it to Merced by bus, blending in with hikers and college kids heading south. Dale bought new clothes from a thrift shop. Jimmy shaved. They looked like anyone. They found a payphone in a liquor store parking lot. Dale dialed the only number he remembered, an old friend in Bishop who ran a gear shop. "Cal?" "Dale?" The voice crackled. "Where the hell have you been?" "Off-grid." There was a pause. "I heard some things, weird things." "Yeah. You in trouble?" "I don't know." Cal hesitated, then, "If you come east, I'll put you up. But don't bring anything." "We didn't." "You sure?" Dale didn't answer. They arrived in Bishop 4 days later. The town felt removed from the madness, a high desert basin far from federal reach. Cal's shop looked the same. Dusty shelves, old pitons, a map of the eastern Sierra with red thumbtacks. Cal hugged them both, then locked the door. Over cheap beer and silence, Cal finally asked, "You find the plane?" Dale stared into his drink. "Yeah." "Was it what they said?" Jimmy answered. "It was worse." Cal leaned back. "I had a guy come through here last week, said he was filming a documentary, asked about Merced Pass, then asked if I knew anyone who'd been in Camp 4 that winter." Dale tensed. "You say anything?" "Hell no, I'm not stupid." They sat in silence again. Then Cal said, "You know they won't let it go, right?" Dale nodded. "That's why we won't either." The next morning, they wrote down everything, every date, every name, every bag, every moment, from the hike-in to the burial of Lisa's notebook. They didn't use real names. They encrypted key details, they made copies, and they mailed one to a P.O. box in San Francisco under a pseudonym Jimmy had used in college. The rest, they burned. That night, as they walked under the wide desert sky, Jimmy turned to Dale. "You think anyone will ever believe it?" Dale looked west toward the mountains, toward Yosemite, toward the ridge they'd crossed in silence. "They will, but not because we tell them." "Then how?" He smiled. "Because one day someone else will find the pine cone." Spring rolled across the Sierra Nevada like a slow wave, melting the last traces of winter from the granite shoulders of Yosemite. Streams swelled, snowfields receded, and the high alpine lakes turned from white to steel blue. But Dale and Jimmy were gone. In Bishop, they kept their heads down. They volunteered at Cal's shop, slept in a shed behind the storage room, and spoke to no one. Their names weren't on any lease, any register, any schedule. They were ghosts now. But ghosts can't hide forever. It started with a newspaper. Cal tossed it onto the counter one morning. "Partial remains from Yosemite plane crash identified. Source unknown." Beneath the headline, a blurry photo of men in wetsuits and government jackets dragging dark plastic bundles from a cracked lake. No names, no details, just the note. Recovery continues. Jimmy stared at the paper for a long time. They're still digging. Dale nodded. They won't stop. They debated for days. Stay hidden or get ahead of it? Jimmy argued for silence. Let it die. It's not our problem anymore. But Dale knew better. Secrets didn't die on their own. They needed to be buried or exposed. We don't go to the press, he said. We go to the climbers. So they wrote again. This time not a record, but a story, a narrative. They framed it like legend. 2 dirtbag climbers in the winter of '76 stumble on a crash site, unmarked cargo, mystery men, and silence from above. They didn't use names. They changed locations, but the essence remained. The lake, the cargo, the pine cone. Cal helped print a few dozen copies, unofficial zines distributed to climbing shops across California. Titles scribbled in Sharpie: Frozen Freight, Ice Lake, the High Altitude Drop. It didn't matter what they called it, the story was loose, and it started to grow. A month later, in Tuolumne Meadows, a climber named Iris approached them. She was quiet, smart, and careful, the kind who listened more than she spoke. I found one of your stories, she said, in Berkeley. Dale didn't flinch. And? I thought it was made up. Jimmy gave a half smile. We did too. She reached into her pack and pulled out a Polaroid. Grainy, off-center, a half-submerged wing in the ice, the registration number barely visible, N500AT. Found this in a box of old photos from a ranger friend, she said. Dale held it like it was radioactive. You've got something, she said, and if that picture's real, someone's gonna want it back. The threats came quietly. First, a missing envelope. One of their zines mailed to a shop in Mammoth never arrived. The store owner said someone came asking about it a week later, man in a windbreaker, sunglasses, government smile. Then, Cal got a call from a blocked number. Tell them to stop printing. Click. That night, Dale checked the shed's back door. It was cracked open. Nothing taken, nothing broken. Just open. The message was clear. Still, the story kept spreading. A climber in Oregon said he'd met someone who found a brick in 1977. Someone else wrote a letter claiming they'd seen the cargo loaded onto a private truck. Another claimed to know Lisa, but wouldn't say where she was now. Each clue more cryptic than the last, but all circling the same gravity well. Then, one morning, a package arrived. No return address inside. A cassette tape. They played it on an old deck in Cal's back room, static. Then a voice. Female. Raspy. Tired. Don't look for me, it's too late, but they're not who you think. It wasn't a smuggling op, it was a drop, a delivery, and it never reached its buyer. They're trying to clean the slate. Pause. They'll bury everything if they have to. People, truth, even the land. Another pause. You were right to hide the notebook. Don't go back. Click. It was Lisa. Dale sat for hours after that. He thought about the lake, the stillness, the wing, the quiet weight of the cargo, the way Camp 4 changed overnight, the frostbitten fear in Lisa's eyes. What if we don't tell anyone else? Jimmy asked. What do you mean? What if we stop? Stop pushing. Stop printing. Let it fade. Let it rot. Dale looked at him. I think that's what they want. Yeah, and maybe that's what it needs. Dale shook his head slowly. You can't unfind something. Jimmy looked away. Maybe not, but you can leave it behind. They made one more copy of the tape. They hid it in the wall of a closed-down motel on the edge of Bishop. Left no note. Just a pine cone on the windowsill. A signal. A breadcrumb. For whoever came next, then they packed their gear and disappeared again. In early June, the National Park Service quietly issued a statement. It was brief, almost sterile. All recovery operations related to the December 1976 aviation incident in the Merced Pass area have concluded. No further public comment will be made at this time. No mention of what was recovered, no names, no details, just silence. But climbers talk, rangers drink, locals observe. And all across the Sierra, from Tuolumne to Lone Pine, there was a ripple. Not fear, not even curiosity, just unease. like something important had been locked away without explanation. And in Bishop, Dale read the statement twice, folded the paper, and threw it into the stove. "They've shut it down," he said. Jimmy was sharpening a pocket knife on a flat stone, which means they've found what they wanted. Or didn't. Cal had started closing the shop early. Foot traffic had changed. Less gear talk, more questions. "You sell snowshoes in bulk? You know anyone who used to camp near Merced Pass? Ever hear of a girl named Lisa?" And always, after they left, a parked car just down the block. Same tan paint, same antenna. Dale noticed it on a Tuesday. By Friday, it was gone. Then Cal got a call from an old friend, Doug, a retired Yosemite Ranger now working trails in Kings Canyon. "They're pulling files," Doug said. "What kind?" Cal asked. "Anything with Merced Pass, 1976 through 1980. Climber logs, rescue reports, even incident forms for lost boots." "Who's they?" "Didn't say, but they had federal clearance. Weren't from Interior." Dale and Jimmy didn't speak much after that. They knew what it meant. Not just surveillance, sanitization. They weren't just burying the evidence. They were bleaching the ground, wiping names, and that meant one thing: someone had started talking. 2 weeks later, a man named Barrett showed up at the gear shop, mid-40s, sun-weathered, with boots too clean and a handshake too firm. Said he used to climb back in the day. Said he was writing a book. Said he was fascinated by lost expeditions. He asked about winter routes to Merced Pass. He asked if anyone local remembered the crash. He asked about Dale. Cal said he didn't know anyone by that name. Barrett smiled and left a business card. There was no number on it. That night, Dale sat by the riverbank behind the shed. The water moved fast, full from melt. He tossed a rock in, watched the ripples fan out. "I think it's time," he said. Jimmy sat nearby, back against a cottonwood. "To what?" "Disappear for good." Jimmy said nothing. Dale looked at him. "We split. You go north, I go south. Different names, different lives." Jimmy turned his head slowly. "You still have it, don't you?" Dale didn't answer. Yes, he still had one thing left. Not the notebook, not the zines, not the tape. One brick, one small, water-damaged, plastic-wrapped brick from that first bag. He'd kept it wrapped in wax and sealed in a tin, hidden inside the lining of an old crash pad. He didn't know why he'd kept it. Maybe proof, maybe defiance, maybe guilt. But now it was leverage, or a death sentence. They moved that night. No goodbyes, no trail, just a river crossing, a dry gully, and the low hum of tires on a gravel road. Jimmy hitched north, toward Idaho. Forests, solitude, maybe a new name. Dale went south, toward the desert, toward heat, toward places where no one asked for last names. Cal stayed behind. He was too old to run. But he knew how to shut up, and he'd been hiding things long before Dale or Jimmy ever picked up an ice axe. Dale resurfaced 2 months later in Ridgecrest, working at a climbing wall run out of an old shipping container. His hair was shorter, his voice quieter. He didn't tell stories, and he didn't go by Dale, but he still checked the mail. And one day a letter arrived, no return address, just a single line inside: "You never buried the last piece." He burned the envelope immediately. Then he dug up the tin, wrapped it again, carried it into the hills, and buried it under a rock shaped like a wolf's head. No pine cone this time. Years would pass. The Merced crash would be remembered only in rumor. The lake would be renamed on some maps. Camp 4 would regain its climbers but not its silence, and Dale, or the man who used to be him, would carry the memory like frostbite, dormant until cold returned. Because some things don't melt. Some things stay buried, and some things, when dug up, bury you instead. In the high country near Mount Langley, summer comes late and leaves early. Dale, now answering to Nate, pitched a tent among the scattered granite boulders, far from any trail, under the wide vacancy of sky that made the world feel endless. He hadn't spoken aloud in days. The desert had taught him silence. The mountains enforced it. He spent his time walking, drawing ridgelines in an old weatherproof notebook. He climbed until his fingers bled and his arms gave out. Ate freeze-dried food, slept in bursts, listened for things that never came. Until one morning, they did. It was the sound of boots crunching over scree. Too clean. Too rhythmic. Dale pressed flat behind a rock. A man appeared 50 feet down the slope, gray pack, short beard, mirrored sunglasses. He looked civilian, but his movements said otherwise. Trained. The man didn't glance around. He just kept moving up the ridge. Dale waited an hour before returning to his camp. Nothing touched, no prints, but a pine cone now sat on top of his tent. He packed everything and moved that night. For 3 weeks, he wandered east toward Death Valley. The terrain grew harsher, crueler, the kind of place no one followed you. In a slot canyon near Panamint Springs, he ran into a man in an old Forest Service jacket cooking beans on a twig stove. The man smiled. "Long way from Tuolumne." Dale's pulse spiked. "Don't know what you mean." "Sure you do." He handed Dale a spoon. "My name's Cole. I was at Lower Merced Pass, February 1977. Dale froze. "I never told anyone," Cole said, "but I know what I saw: cargo, ice, canvas, and that plane wasn't flying blind." "What do you want?" Dale asked. "Nothing, just someone to say it out loud to." They sat in silence for an hour, eating cheap beans under a purple sky. Then Cole stood up. "I'm heading to Ridgecrest. If you need to disappear harder than you already have, don't go south." They watched the border. Then he walked away. The encounter shook Dale more than he admitted. For days he hiked without stopping, like distance could erase the ghosts. But the desert doesn't forget. It stores memory in stone and silence. At an abandoned miner's shack near Ballarat, he found something scratched into the wood beside the door. N500AT. He stepped back. The lettering was fresh. Someone was still tracking him. That night, dreams came back. The lake, the bags, Lisa's voice on the tape. They're not looking for what crashed. They're looking for who sent it. But now there was something new. A second plane, black as pitch, hovering above the lake like a predator. Then a sound, not mechanical but alive, like breathing metal. He woke sweating. He couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't been just a crash. It had been an exchange. By late July, Dale crossed into Nevada under the name Kevin Holt, using an ID Cal had once printed for him with a fake ski lodge job on the back. He kept to small towns, worked as a handyman, fixed windows, dug ditches, slept in motels where no one asked for deposits. In a town called Pioche, he walked into a bar where the jukebox only played tapes. He sat, ordered a Coke, and tried to disappear. But on the wall behind the bartender was a framed photo. 5 people, winter gear. One of them, unmistakably, was Lisa, younger, smiling. The bartender noticed him looking. "You a climber?" Dale nodded slowly. "Used to be." "She was good," the bartender said. "Said she was headed to Yosemite. Never saw her again." Dale stared at the photo for a long time. "She ever come back?" he asked. The bartender shook his head. "Only in silence." Outside, Dale stood in the dusk. Lisa had been here, left a breadcrumb or a warning. He thought of the pine cones, the coordinates, the tape, the scratched tail number. This wasn't over. He didn't know if it would ever be over, but now it was no longer about staying hidden. It was about finding the truth. The next morning, Dale took a Polaroid of the bar photo with Lisa in it. It felt like theft, but it also felt necessary. He folded the image and slid it into the back of his notebook, the one that now served more as a map of questions than a record of answers. By the time the sun broke over the Nevada hills, he was gone from Pioche. He moved east, sticking to back roads and bus lines, always watching for the same things. Vans with blacked-out windows, travelers who didn't seem lost enough, pine cones where they didn't belong, patterns repeated, faces changed but stared the same way. In Ely, he picked up an envelope left at a trailhead locker he'd once stashed for emergencies. Inside were 2 torn topo maps, an old climber's route log, and a message printed in block capitals. "Stop running. Follow the trail. 38.6221 degrees north, 119.8312 degrees west." Dale froze. That coordinate was real. He knew it. It pointed to an overlook near Sonora Pass. Remote, high, not often visited. He had no idea who sent it or why now. But after months of silence, it was something. And something was better than ghosts. It took him 2 days to reach the pass. He hiked in from the south, detouring around a burned section of forest, passing through a meadow drowned in mosquitoes and silence. He moved with practiced care, checking his back trail, watching for signs of recent footprints, anything out of place. By the third ridge, he saw it. A single pine cone balanced atop a cairn of river stones, and beneath the cairn, wrapped in waxed canvas, another tape. He found shelter in a glacial hollow and played the tape on the last remaining battery-powered recorder he carried. The voice was faint, fuzzed, but unmistakably Lisa's. "If you're hearing this, then they didn't get me. Not yet." Pause. "I made it out of Bridgeport. I made it to Tahoe. I kept my head down. But they're still pulling people in. I heard about Cole. I know they got his notes. And Jimmy, if he's still alive, he needs to leave Idaho. They're watching the Sawtooths." Another pause. Her breathing was rough. "I left something under the old ranger station at Levitt Meadows, inside the floorboards. The original copy of the manifest. I took it before the agents arrived. I don't know how much longer I have." Static. Then, "They were moving more than just illegal cargo." I saw the logbook. Destination codes don't match any airstrip. The flight plan ends midair, like the plane was supposed to vanish. A long silence. Then she whispered, "They were trying to erase something, or someone." Click. Dale stared into the fire for a long time that night. The manifest, the logbook, the altered flight plan. It confirmed what he'd suspected for months, that the plane wasn't just about the cargo. It was about the delivery never arriving. And someone had decided it had to disappear midair. Maybe it was a drop that never made it, or a witness that was never supposed to survive. Either way, it meant one thing. There was still proof. The next morning, he bushwhacked through the lodgepole forest north of Sonora Pass and made his way toward Levitt Meadows. The old ranger station there had been closed since '74 after a wildfire damaged its roof. He approached cautiously. The windows were broken. Weeds had overtaken the porch. Inside, dust lay thick across the floorboards. But the place had the strange, preserved air of somewhere people still visited. He stepped inside, waited. No sound. He moved to the rear corner near the old wood stove and pried up the floorboard. Beneath it, an oilskin bundle. And inside the bundle, papers. The manifest was faded but legible. Tail number N500AT. Departure, Ensenada, Mexico. Destination, OP Hold, Zone 7. That was it. No coordinates, no FAA airport code, just Zone 7. He flipped to the second page, listed cargo. Unmarked units, 31 count. Then a stamp. No inspection, pre-authorized. Dale sat down hard. This wasn't smuggling. This wasn't even black market. This was something else entirely. He left that night, slept under a ledge, burned the fire low, and sealed the manifest in plastic. The next morning, as he packed, he saw movement in the trees. A man. Watching. Not approaching, not armed, just observing. Dale didn't run. He held the man's gaze across 50 yards of alpine light, and the man turned and walked away. No message, no threat, just presence. Dale stood there long after he vanished. The game had changed. It wasn't about hiding anymore. It was about surviving long enough to understand the rules. The phrase wouldn't leave his mind. Zone 7. Dale sat beside a dry creek bed beneath the tree line, holding the manifest like it was radioactive. He reread the words until they blurred. Not a real airport, no ICAO code, just a void on paper, a placeholder for disappearance. The more he stared at it, the more he realized Zone 7 wasn't a location, it was a classification, a destination beyond acknowledgement. He didn't know how deep it went, but he had a place to start. In Reno, tucked behind a pawn shop, Dale met a man named Martin. They'd crossed paths once before during a rescue training class in Bishop. Martin wasn't a climber. He was a weather tech who'd once worked for the FAA. Quiet, nervous, meticulous. The kind of man who didn't like patterns breaking. When Dale mentioned the tail number, Martin had gone pale. "You want coffee?" Martin had asked. Number I want answers. Over the hum of an old fan and the clink of ceramic mugs, Martin laid it out. There were black zones during the Cold War, not officially named, not airfields, air corridors, places where flight paths could end without triggering NORAD. Some were used for surveillance drones, some for quiet cargo. Stuff nobody wanted logged. And Zone 7? Dale asked. Martin rubbed his face. I heard about it once, not by name, but in code. Referenced in an old debrief I was helping redact. One pilot, one unauthorized drop in Sierra Nevada airspace. Late 76, Dale's blood ran cold. Martin leaned closer. The plane wasn't just smuggling, it was part of something bigger. Covert delivery. Cargo with no ID. The kind of thing where everyone involved vanishes afterward. And the plane? Martin looked him in the eye. Wasn't supposed to be found. Dale left Reno the next morning with a map marked in red pencil and a page of coordinates. Not precise, but tight enough. Martin had triangulated possible endpoints of unsanctioned Sierra flights during 1976 to 1978. One cluster was near Yosemite, another just south of the Nevada Test Range. He circled the first. It pointed straight toward Minaret's wilderness. He hiked in from Agnew Meadow under a sky so bright it looked artificial. The peaks loomed like teeth, jagged and silent. Few people came this deep without a reason. Dale had his. 3 days in, he found something. An old crash beacon torn from its mount, rusted to bone. It lay in a granite chute, half buried in scree. No wreckage nearby. But someone had tried to use it. He lifted it gently and turned it over. Handwritten on the inside was a name. J. Nelson, the co-pilot. He slept poorly that night. The wind had changed. The quiet no longer felt like protection. It felt like surveillance. At dawn, he found tracks, fresh, 2 sets, one heavy boot, the other smaller. He followed them through the trees until they vanished across a dry talus field. Someone else was searching, but for what? Later that day, he reached the edge of a high basin, an old glacial bowl littered with sharp stone and silence. And there, half buried under a moraine, he found something he hadn't expected. A piece of fuselage, twisted, charred, aluminum torn like paper, spray-painted with stenciled black lettering, Zone 7, -return. Void. He stepped back. It wasn't from the Howard 500. Different model, smaller, sleeker. This was another plane, another crash. He dug until sunset, found a panel, a box, charred plastic, no flight recorder. But inside the box was a roll of undeveloped film sealed in lead foil. He held it like it was gold. Back in Mammoth, he paid a photographer cash to develop it. Said it was for a dead uncle's estate. The man barely blinked. 3 hours later, Dale had the prints. Grainy, warped, but in one frame clear enough to make out. A group of men standing beside a hangar, one pointing, another with a clipboard, and in the background, stacked crates with the word void stenciled in white. The last photo was darker. It showed a cargo hold, metal racks, and what looked like long, sealed cases, not brick-sized, not even body-sized, something else. Dale felt sick. He rented a room under a fake name, locked the prints in a Bible, and burned the negatives. He didn't sleep that night. In the morning, a note had been slid under his door. You're looking in the wrong direction. Stop chasing debris. Start asking why it was dropped at all. No signature, just a pine cone taped to the top. Dale stared at it for a long time, then packed his bag and turned back toward the lake. Dale returned to Yosemite under a false name and a ranger hat he'd borrowed from a second-hand store. His beard was longer now, his gait slower, like the weight of knowledge had settled in his bones. He walked the same trails as before, but with different eyes. He wasn't a climber anymore, he was a witness, and he was here to ask the one question no one else had dared. Why was the cargo dropped? Camp 4 in the summer of 1977 looked deceptively normal. Climbers flopped on pads, shoes hanging from branches, gear drying on lines between tents. But Dale saw the tension underneath. The regulars were fewer. Some had aged beyond their years. The stories around the campfire were quieter, censored. He sat by the communal table and waited. Eventually, someone approached. "You're back," said a voice. He turned. It was Iris, the quiet-eyed climber who had first mentioned Lisa's photo months ago. "I wasn't sure you'd make it," she said. "I almost didn't. Things are different now. I noticed." Iris led him behind the boulders to a tarp-covered shelter. Inside, on a makeshift table, was a spread of notes, photos, trail maps, and coded messages. "They call it the Black Archive," she said. "Anything that couldn't be said out loud, we wrote down. We pass it around. Keep it moving. Dale flipped through. Familiar handwriting. Some from Lisa. Some from Jimmy. Some even his own. This, she said, pointing to a charcoal rubbing, came from a hatch plate recovered from a second crash, not the Howard. This one was older, lighter. The metal rubbing read, Property of XOZ, 7/no civilian contact permitted. Dale frowned. XOZ 7? Not a company, not in any registry, but it shows up in 2 other places, once on a flight plan filed out of Fallon Naval Air Station and once in a customs report, redacted, all dated December 1976. What's the theory? Iris looked up. That it wasn't just cargo. It was an experiment. Dale returned to Lower Merced Pass Lake 2 days later. The ice was gone, replaced by still water and dense fog. Wildflowers ringed the shore, a place of beauty and burial. He stood where the wing had once breached the surface. The trees whispered. Somewhere nearby, he knew the forest still held secrets, secrets in waterproof canvas, in handwritten logbooks, in bones without names. And he wasn't alone. Across the lake, a man stood watching him. Same figure he'd seen before. Quiet, patient, unmoving. This time, Dale walked toward him. But by the time he reached the opposite bank, the man was gone. In his place, another pine cone. That night, Dale camped on a granite ledge above the lake. He lit no fire, wrote in the back of his notebook. XOZ 7, Zone 7, Void Cargo. He made a list of what he knew. The Howard 500 was not a standard drug run. The manifest was pre-authorized, unsigned, unlogged. The destination didn't exist. A second crash occurred in the Minarets region. XOZ-7 had at least 1 aircraft operating from a military base. Crates in the recovered photo were sealed, uniform, unmarked. Cargo logs referred to units, not goods. Lisa had said they were trying to erase someone. 2 days later, Iris handed him something wrapped in waxed cloth. Came in through the archive. We think it's real. He unwrapped it. Inside, a page torn from a military operations manual. It was coded, but some lines were clear. Should operation exposure exceed 72 hours, terminate all known civilian contact zones, and deploy cover narrative protocols. Ensure ground teams are briefed. Experimental payload classified under AE-5 void. Witnesses subject to clean removal. AE-5 void, the same label as the crates in the photo. He copied the phrase onto the wall of the archive, then drew a single pine cone beside it. 3 nights later, a fire broke out near Glacier Point. Rangers said it was lightning, but Dale knew better. It had rained all day. The next morning, the archive was gone. Nothing but ash and wind. Dale didn't stay. He left Yosemite the same way he'd entered, through silence and shadows. But he carried something with him now, not the manifest, not the photos, not even the names. He carried the knowledge that somewhere, buried under classified codes and forgotten crash sites, someone had tried to deliver something to nowhere. And when that failed, they erased everything, everyone, except him. He stayed low after the archive was destroyed, disappeared again, this time to a place even ghosts avoided. Tonopah, a town that existed because someone once said it should, then was forgotten when they changed their mind. Old airstrips, cracked asphalt, salt wind, and silence. No one asked questions there, especially not about old planes. Dale rented a storage container near a former mining lot, insulated it, lined the interior with plastic sheeting, taped photographs to the walls. This was his bunker now, his last stand. The fire at Glacier Point hadn't just destroyed the Black Archive, it had sent a message. They were watching. And they were done with patience. Iris had vanished, no word, no sign. Her tent at Camp 4 collapsed under morning dew. Her boots still laced inside. Dale spent a day just walking, through the valley, through the woods, through memory. Each step a silent acknowledgement that whatever this had started as, it was no longer his to contain. It was survival now. And someone had rewritten the rules. In Tonopah, he picked through surplus auctions, bought a shortwave radio, a field camera, found a retired lineman who sold him an old map from 1974, the kind with no GPS, just roads, trails, power lines. He traced the wires. They led northeast, into the mountains, toward something marked only as Bridge Gate. It took 2 days of hiking, no road signs, no fences, just scrub and dust. But the map had been right. Bridgegate wasn't a place. It was a code stenciled onto a rusted signal tower at the edge of an old communications relay. Half buried, forgotten, but still humming. He climbed inside. The generator was cold, the wires dead, but someone had been here, and recently. On the wall, a list of numbers. Some scratched out, some circled, one coordinate repeated, 37.6599 degrees north, 119.4895 degrees west. He froze. That was Yosemite. That was the lake. He returned once more. Couldn't help himself. Passed through Lee Vining, crossed Tioga Pass at night, camped beneath stars so bright they felt invasive. At Lower Merced Pass Lake, the fog was back. Summer haze, but colder than it should have been. He stepped to the edge and waited, and like before, a figure stood across the water. Only this time, the man did not disappear. They met halfway. The man wore no insignia, just a tan jacket, pressed slacks, and boots without mud. "You've been persistent," the man said. "I've been alive," Dale replied. The man nodded. "Not many are, not from that winter. I know what was on the plane." "No," the man said calmly. "You know what was supposed to be seen." He reached into his pocket and handed Dale a black envelope. "Burn this. You'll understand." Then he turned and walked away. Dale didn't burn it immediately. He waited, hiked 6 miles out, found a ridge, built a fire, opened the envelope. Inside, 6 photos. One of the lake before the crash, one of the cargo, unboxed, sealed in what looked like clear caskets. One of the pilot's ID, John Glisky, burned beyond recognition. 3 more. A file labeled Project AE5 Void. A briefing slide. Biological materials under containment, non-human, recoverable, erasable. And a final photo. 2 men shaking hands in front of the Howard 500, one in civilian clothes, the other in uniform, both smiling. The man in uniform wore a patch, EXO-Z7. He watched the flames eat the envelope, watched the blackened photos curl, then drift into ash. And still, the cold wouldn't leave. That night, someone left a cassette on his sleeping bag. The voice was Lisa's, tired, hurt. "I made it as far as I could. I saw the containers. I heard them humming. I don't know if they were alive. I don't know if I am anymore. But if you find this, run. Don't uncover it. Don't tell it. Just let it die." She paused. Then, "Some things aren't meant to be discovered. And some things aren't meant to crash. They were delivered." He smashed the tape, buried it in stone, and kept walking. Because the truth wasn't just buried in Yosemite. It was still moving. There's a sound Dale never forgot. Not the roar of a twin-engine Howard 500, not the brittle crack of lake ice giving way. It was the hum. A low metallic vibration, constant, cold, felt more in the spine than in the ears. He first heard it that winter night in 1976, standing on the edge of Lower Merced Pass Lake, when the ice still sealed the wreckage beneath it. At the time, he thought it was wind, or stress fractures in the lake. Now, he knew better. He stayed out of the parks after Tonopah, moved through desert towns like pollen in the wind, Death Valley, Beatty, Goldfield. His face changed in mirrors, not from disguise, but from erosion. Every now and then he checked the weather reports, not for storms, for crashes. One morning, in a gas station outside Lone Pine, a headline caught his eye. "Unexplained seismic event recorded near Tuolumne High Country." He read on. Rangers reported tremors, rock slides, a pattern of dying pines near a frozen alpine tarn. He folded the paper slowly. The lake had woken up. He reached out to the last person he knew still alive from the old days, Cal. The gear shop was gone, long sold, but the man himself lived out in the high desert under a water tower and a flagpole with no flag. They spoke at sunset. No greetings, no pretense. "You felt it?" Dale asked. Cal nodded. "I saw the readings. Something's under there, something moving." Lisa called it alive. She wasn't wrong. Cal showed him a hand-drawn diagram, reproduced from memory from a schematic he'd seen once in 1977 on a ranger's clipboard before it vanished. A grid, 7 drop zones, 1 central hub, Zone 7, the rest scattered along the Sierra crest. None of them were official, Cal said. No coordinates, just designations, Z1 through Z6. And all of them triangulated around that lake. Why? Dale asked. Cal lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. They weren't trying to deliver something. They were building a perimeter around something already here. That night, Dale took a long walk through the sagebrush. The stars were brutal, sharp, cold, silent. He remembered the look in Lisa's eyes when she'd said, "They'll bury everything, even the land." What if it wasn't metaphor? What if they were trying to bury something literal? A week later, Dale climbed north again, this time not toward Yosemite, but toward the eastern edge of the minarets. There were stories of an old maintenance tunnel, abandoned military fiber lines strung in the 60s through a series of cuts below the ridge. He found the access hatch buried under a rockfall, blasted open, rusted, but not collapsed. Inside, darkness, dust, and a hum. He walked for hours, no light except for a red LED on his shoulder rig, no signs of wildlife, just layers of dust and the feeling of being watched. Halfway through the passage, he found it, a maintenance station, long dead terminal, and scrawled across the wall in black marker, AE5 void units unstable. Hold chambers, integrity failure. No access to core. Below that, smeared in grease, do not attempt to contain. He staggered back into daylight as if resurfacing from a nightmare. The wind hit him like truth. Whatever had been in the cargo, it hadn't stayed in the cargo. He returned to California, showed him photos. They both sat in silence. Cal finally said, "This goes deeper than planes." Dale nodded. "It goes deeper than land." They circled locations on the old map, drop sites, disruptions, dead ranger stations, the archive fires. Every one of them formed a ring, a barrier. "What's in the center?" Cal asked. Dale traced his finger to the lake, then whispered, "Not a crash site. A vault." He left that night, didn't say goodbye. He didn't know if he'd come back. He just knew he had to go where it started, and this time he wouldn't be digging for answers. He'd be sealing something shut. He started before dawn. The hike into Lower Merced Pass Lake wasn't difficult by summer standards, but Dale moved like every step cost him a year. Every bend in the trail was a memory he didn't want. Every tree carried the weight of what had been buried beneath it. When he reached the lake, the surface was a dark mirror, windless, breathless, waiting. He didn't bring climbing gear this time. He brought a crowbar, a small pack, 3 flares, and what was left of Lisa's journal, scorched around the edges but still legible in the middle. He knew what he had to do. There was a ridge above the lake's southern bank. Behind it, obscured by trees and decades of silence, was the entrance. The real one. Not the broken fuselage, not the wreckage, but the hidden door. He had seen it once in a photo Cal retrieved years ago, barely visible, camouflaged in lichen and stone. Everyone thought it was a mistake, an illusion. But Dale had never stopped thinking about it. Now standing before it, he saw the truth. It wasn't a door. It was a hatch. He pried it open with effort. Hinges groaned. Air escaped like a sigh held since '76. The passage descended into shadow. Man-made. Angled. Reinforced with steel ribs along the sides. He stepped inside. The hum returned, faint at first, then growing, a resonance that buzzed in a bone. The corridor was narrow, 50 feet. Then a bend, then the elevator. It didn't work anymore. Power was long dead. But there was a maintenance ladder. Dale descended for 15 minutes, metal slick with moisture. Air metallic, cold. With every rung, he felt time thinning. When he reached the bottom, he was in a chamber larger than any tunnel he had seen before. Rows of sealed units, crates, containers, most rotted, some shattered, one still whole, marked in red. AE5 void/untouchable/return to sender. He didn't go near it. Instead, he walked the perimeter. Found control panels covered in dust, screens shattered, a chair facing a long dead monitor. Someone had worked here. Waited here. At the far end of the chamber, a massive steel door sat half open. A breach. Inside, another room, smaller, cylindrical. A cage. Number A seal. The walls were etched with chemical burns. Something had leaked or escaped. Scratches ran along the inside of the steel, not mechanical, claw-like. Dale took a single photo, then turned and began to climb. He didn't run. He didn't panic, but he didn't stop until he saw sky again. By dusk, he had sealed the hatch, piled rocks over it, dug into the earth with his hands until his nails tore, covered the surface with brush, packed dirt tight. He left no mark, then walked to the lake's edge and dropped the photo into the water. Watched it sink. He didn't sleep that night. He sat beneath the stars, wrapped in a blanket of fear not for himself, but for what still moved below. Not fast, not strong, but patient. He remembered Lisa's voice. Some things aren't meant to be found. And Cal's map, they weren't delivering something. They were trying to contain it. He left Yosemite the next morning, didn't look back, didn't leave coordinates, didn't write it down. Some truths don't belong in records, some vaults don't need keys, they just need silence. 3 days after he left the lake for the last time, Dale found himself in a town with no post office. It sat near the Nevada border, a cluster of cracked roads and rusted roofs, where cell signals died and dust carried secrets instead of sound. The locals didn't ask questions, they sold coffee thick enough to stand a spoon in and eyed outsiders the way old trees watch storms, silently and with long memory. Dale rented a room above the bar, paid in cash, left no name. The walls were thin, the mattress older than he was, but it was quiet, and for the first time in months, the hum was gone. He slept through the first night, dreamless. On the second morning, he opened his notebook and began to draw. Not the chamber, not the hatch, not even the cargo. He drew the ring, the 7 zones, the lake at its center, the burns on the walls, the marks in the steel. He drew what he felt, not what he saw. Lines that didn't follow terrain, shapes that pulsed on the page, a barrier not of metal or concrete, but of decision. Someone had chosen to contain whatever lived beneath that ice, not destroy it, not reveal it, just delay it. He tried to recall the exact number of crates he'd seen, the ones still intact, the ones shattered, but memory is unreliable when memory wants to forget. Still, he was sure of one thing. One crate was newer than the others. Different metal, different fastenings, fresh rust, which meant someone had added to the vault recently. That night, he found a note on his doorknob, typed, cheap paper, no signature. The containment has failed twice before, first in 1959, then in 1976. Zone 7 is no longer stable, the others are compromised. You were never supposed to survive. He burned the note in the sink. The smoke smelled like tape and memory. In the following weeks, he moved often. Tonopah, Ely, Winnemucca, always small towns, always beneath radar. Sometimes he found others, people who had heard things, men who remembered the wreck, women who used to work in ranger stations that no longer existed. One had kept a clipping. Unnamed object washes up near Marble Canyon. Authorities decline comment. The photo was grainy, but Dale knew what it was. The casing. The long sealed shell that once sat in the vault. Now breached. Now drifting. He asked the man who gave him the clipping where he found it. "Old drawer," the man said. "Used to be my brother's. He was a chopper medic. Back in 76. Where is he now?" Dale asked. The man looked away. "Didn't make it past 77. Dale sent one message through a contact he hadn't spoken to since the days of the archive. A line of code, an old frequency, no return address. Still active. Containment breached. Re-establish perimeter? Day. He didn't expect a response, but 3 days later, a radio clicked to life. 3 beeps, then silence. He smiled grimly. Someone was still listening. Back in his room, he opened a new notebook. Page 1. Zone 7, AE5 void. Situational containment unstable. Below it, he wrote a list. Crate movement observed. Post 1976, Lisa. Presumed dead, possibly silenced. Jimmy. Unknown whereabouts. Archive destroyed. Perimeter weakening recent seismic activity above containment vault. Unknown watchers still active tunnel system partially accessible. Then, below that, next steps. None. Observe only. That night, he dreamed of the hatch again. But this time, It was open. And nothing came out, because nothing had to. What lay below didn't need to chase, didn't need to fight, it only needed to wait. There's a name that shows up only once in all the files Dale had collected. Buried in a requisition form from 1975, misfiled under maintenance. Site custodian, R. Tesler. He had glossed over it a dozen times, but something about it echoed now, after the clipping, the seismic reports, the failed perimeter, because someone stayed. Someone was left to guard the vault long after the crash. And maybe someone still was. He found a lead through an old utility directory archived in a public records office in Bishop. The name Tesler came up twice. Once as a field technician for the California Energy Commission. Once in a back-page obituary from 1983. No relatives listed, no surviving family. But the obituary mentioned a remote cabin near June Lake. Dale packed his bag that night. He hiked out alone. Snow still clung to the shadows. June Lake in early spring is a place caught between seasons. Ice cracks from below, pines creak in the thaw, and footprints last too long in the mud. He found the cabin half collapsed, nestled into a bluff above the waterline. It wasn't on any map. Inside, rot dust. A stove filled with old newspaper, rusted utensils, a cot with a blanket folded too neatly for a place long abandoned, and on the wall, nailed into a beam, a photograph, black and white. A man standing beside a radio tower, young, weathered, confident in the way people only are when they think they're part of something greater. On the back, Tesler, 1974 Z7 perimeter. Dale searched the floorboards, found a metal lockbox wedged beneath a loose plank. Inside, a reel of tape, a pencil sketch, and a thin booklet titled Containment Behavior Protocols, AE5 Class Materials. He didn't breathe for several seconds. The booklet wasn't thick, maybe 20 pages, most redacted, but what remained was enough. AE5 class entities display passive traits until exposure to open terrain or unauthorized interaction. Dormancy periods vary. Containment failure does not guarantee aggression, but may yield structural migration. Note: do not initiate conversation with unit should behavioral activity occur. Units may mimic. Units may mourn. Dale set the tape up using a field recorder. Static filled the space. Then a voice. Tesler's. Day 371, snow's thinning, no visual contact for 3 weeks, but there's movement beneath. Every 3 days, around midnight, it paces day 376. Heard something. Not human, not mechanical, like whispering through frozen glass. Day 379, it knew my name. Dale sat motionless. The sketch was crude but clear, a figure curled within a pod, curled as if sleeping. Unmoving, labeled Unit 5, retained for observation. Beneath it, in small writing, It dreams. We all do. He buried the box, not to hide it, but to mark it. He stacked stones over the ground, not a cairn, a grave. Back in town, he tracked down the only other Tesler in the area, a librarian in her 60s named Maren Tesler, no known relation. He asked her if she'd heard of Robert Tesler. She blinked slowly, then said, "My father's brother. He disappeared before I was born. Family never talked about him. Do you have any of his things?" She hesitated, then nodded. That night she gave Dale a box. Inside, photographs, handwritten letters, and one strange object, a compass that spun only near stone. And a postcard dated August 1976. On it, still here. They say it's dormant again, but I'm not. I still see the shapes at dawn. I don't sleep. I don't breathe right anymore. If you ever find this, don't follow. Don't come up here. Don't look in the water. Our Dale stayed up all night. He didn't write. He didn't plan. He just watched the compass spin and waited for the hum to return. Spring turned to summer and Dale stopped checking calendars. He measured time now by the ache in his bones and the way silence changed shape around him. Towns blurred together: Bridgeport, Bishop, Caliente, Susanville. He was no longer searching for answers. He was trying to outpace them, but the map kept pulling him back. 7 zones, 1 center, and too many lines that didn't intersect by accident. He stayed 2 weeks in a roadside motel near Shaver Lake, helping an old couple fix their plumbing for free room and board. On the 3rd morning, the old man left a package outside Dale's door. Wrapped in oilcloth, no name. Inside, a topo map, circa 1967, and a second cassette tape. A note scribbled in pencil. The lake isn't the center, it's the lid. Check beneath Firewatch 12. The Firewatch towers had long since fallen into disrepair, but 12 was marked on the old map. Northeast ridge above Lyle Canyon, hidden under overgrowth, now listed as inactive since '85. Dale hiked out that night. By the second day, his legs throbbed and the elevation thinned his breath, but he kept moving. He found the ruins of Tower 12 near twilight, its skeletal remains half swallowed by pine and silence. Snow lingered in the shaded gullies, and beneath the broken steps, a trap door. Rust made it stubborn, but Dale forced it open with a hatchet. Inside, earth, cold, dry, reinforced with cement, and in the corner a metal cylinder sealed with tape. A sticker on the side read, "Return to Z7 OPS, void protocol in effect." He unsealed it. Inside, documents, photos, and a field journal marked LTS -1976-77. He read by headlamp, January 14th, perimeter breach on Z3, entity attempted movement beyond containment, intercept team dispatched, no survivors. March 22nd, Unit 5 inactive, void layer stabilized, dream response neutral, mimicry ceased. May 3rd, request for permanent lockdown denied. Reason? Higher directive monitoring, long-term interaction. August 9th, one of the units is singing, not audibly, but the instruments pick up waveform signatures matching human lullabies. September 2nd, I'm seeing things outside the hatch that don't cast shadows. Something walks the ridgelines. Dale sat back, shaking. Something had survived. Not just the crash. Not just the vault. Something had learned. He opened the second tape. It played like a distress call. Garbled tones, short bursts of a woman's voice, then a long silence followed by coordinates. 37.6630 degrees north, 119.4895 degrees west, the same spot as always. The lake. He left the documents in a waterproof bag under a boulder, then backtracked out of the forest without making camp. No fire, no rest. Some things don't want witnesses. Back in Shaver Lake, the old couple was gone. Room empty. Car missing. No trace. Not even the receipts at the gas station mentioned their names, like they'd never been there at all. That night, Dale redrew the zones. Each location where he'd found something. A photo, a document, a voice, a warning. Each new mark narrowed the circle tighter. They weren't just trying to bury what was below, they were tracing its reach above. The zones weren't containment, they were contact points, and Dale had touched them all. There are places where radio doesn't work, not from interference or terrain, but something else. Like the air itself forgets how to carry signal. Dale had learned to listen to that silence, and on a jagged ridgeline above Vogelsang Pass it was deafening. He had returned to Yosemite, again, like gravity, but this time not to the lake, to the spine of stone that ran behind it, where the drop zones lined up and the fault lines whispered. A man from Fresno had given him the tip. Old USGS tech, retired. Said there were tremors recently, ones the charts didn't show. I know the difference between tectonics and something trying to move, he had said. The trail was overgrown, buried under spring runoff and debris. But Dale pushed through, following old survey markers hammered into stone 50 years ago. He camped one night under a sloped outcrop. No fire, no radio. And sometime after midnight, his breath caught in his throat, because the silence ended. It started as faint static. A click, then a voice. His handheld, long dead, sparked on. Zone 7, integrity failing, containment breach approaching, unacceptable migration, return object to void perimeter, repeat, return object. Then, silence. He hadn't pressed anything. The batteries weren't even installed. At dawn, he followed the ridgeline north, past Vogelsang Peak, toward a flat saddle of granite the maps called Echo Shelf. The name was apt. Every step returned to him twice. Bird calls came back warped. His own cough echoed with delay. The air had memory, and then he saw it. A metal pylon, half buried, twisted, blackened like it had been burned from the inside out. No insignia, no warning, just one word stenciled in fading paint: receiver. He circled it slowly, a hatch on the side, broken, the interior gutted, but inside, scrawled on the panel wall in permanent marker, "We opened it. We let it speak." It said our names back. Below that, coordinates, different this time: 37.7749 degrees north, 119.628, 2 degrees west, far west of the lake, near an old ranger station burned in '78. He took a photo, then dropped the camera. It had overheated in 38-degree air. He left the shelf before sunset. Didn't make camp. Just walked. By the time he reached the old station ruins, the static was constant. His ears rang. The sky pulsed with auroral haze, though there were no reports of geomagnetic storms. And the trees, those closest to the burned cabin, leaned away, like something pulled from within. Inside, a basement, collapsed in one corner, still accessible. He crawled down. More static. Lights flickered. No power source. He found a cache of tapes in a sealed ammo can, stamped a E5-V/VOX. He played one. The voice was Lisa's, again. They lied to us. It wasn't just a crash. It wasn't just a vault. We were the test. We were always the test. And it listens. It doesn't forget. Don't try to talk to it. Don't give it your name. Then, a second voice. Not hers, but using her cadence. "I remember you, Dale. Come back." He shut it off, left the cabin as fast as his legs would carry him, didn't look back, didn't sleep. That night, as he reached the trailhead, his handheld sparked again. Only once. Just one word. Mimicry. He didn't record it. He didn't have to. Some things once heard never leave you. He made no calls, left no note. He just began walking. Zone 7 wasn't on any active registry anymore. The name had been scrubbed, the access points rerouted, the files marked compartmentalized and buried behind layers of deniability. But Dale knew the way. The hatch still existed, beneath the ridge, masked in granite and overgrowth where the original containment vault had been sealed. Then, in silence, forgotten. He reached it just after dusk. A storm moved low across the sky. Silent lightning flickered above Tuolumne. No thunder. The hatch had been disturbed, rocks displaced, brush cleared. The seal was cracked, and something had opened it from within. He descended slowly, flashlight off. The hum returned, not loud, not invasive, but steady, familiar, like breath. He passed the rusted handrails, the broken elevator shaft, the service ladder where once he had descended alone, years before. Now the air felt warmer, closer, alive. At the vault floor, the scene had changed. The storage crates were gone. Only marks remained, dragged lines across concrete, scorch patterns, deep, concentric rings near the center chamber. A single crate sat alone in the middle of the room, labeled in chalk, "Decoy, non-void." Beside it, a recorder, battery-powered, still blinking. He pressed play. Lisa's voice again. "They're empty now. All of them. They moved themselves. I watched them open one by one. They were never meant to sleep. Just to wait. They let us think we controlled them. But they only needed time. You're here because they want you to be." The recording clicked, and then breathing. His own. Played back to him from years ago, from a tape he never made. "I saw the wreckage. I was there. I remember the ice. You can't forget what calls you by name." He dropped the recorder. It didn't stop playing. He stepped back. The central chamber, the sealed cylinder, was open, not broken, not breached. Just open. The inside was scorched black, walls warped, symbols etched by something not made of hand or heat, footprints let out, but not to the exit, to the wall, and there, carved by fingers or claws or some third thing, Z7 equals Vox. Dale fled, half climbed, half stumbled back up the shaft. Surface air hit him like a scream, but the hum did not stop. It followed him up, through the soil, into the sky. He camped 3 miles away, didn't sleep. In the morning, the trail back to the vault was gone, covered in fresh pine needles, as if the mountain had closed around it again. He returned to the lake, not to speak, not to dig, just to listen. The water was still, too still. He dropped a stone in. The ripples spread and did not return. That night he wrote his final note. Zone 7 breached. Nothing left inside. Containers moved. Sentience confirmed. Purpose unknown. Mimicry escalating. Observation ongoing. Recommend permanent closure of 2 Alumna Ridge sectors. They are not hostile. They are not benign. They are listening. He did not sign it. He just left it on a ranger station desk at the park boundary and disappeared into the trees. The next morning, a transmission pulsed through shortwave bands from Mariposa to Mono. Zone 7 now active. Do not respond. Do not speak. It remembers. No map showed the trail Dale followed now. It wasn't marked on any topographic chart, ranger file, or satellite overlay. But it was there. Etched into instinct. And whatever lived below the mountains had etched it into him. He moved without plan, without goal, just direction. It was the way migrating birds fly without learning, the way rivers carve paths before maps can name them. Each step brought a strange clarity. The world was not shrinking. It was narrowing. Everything led inward. The town he entered had no sign, a gas station, a diner, a post office without staff. He stayed in a room above a garage. The owner never spoke. The window faced east. Each night, a different star was missing. He opened the last notebook, started drawing again. This time, not zones or perimeters, not vaults. He drew gaps, places where things used to be, towers, fire lookouts, ranger cabins, weather stations, each one gone. Vanished, not destroyed, erased. A radio message crackled through at 2:14 a.m. No call sign, no station ID. Just a single sentence. Zone 2 offline, AE5 displacement confirmed. Then static. He checked his notes. Zone 2 had been east of Mono Lake. But Mono Lake wasn't on the map anymore. Not missing, just blank, as if never there. In the diner, a waitress with empty eyes asked if he wanted cream. He hadn't ordered anything. Her name tag said Lisa. But it wasn't her. It didn't sound like her. It sounded like a recording of someone remembering how she spoke. He left that afternoon, back to the road, back to signal. But the signal followed him now. Not in waves, in absence. In a field near Deadman's Pass, he found a blackened scar in the grass, circular, melted stone. No fire reported. He checked with CALFIRE. No record. Just one notation in a decommissioned file. AE5 residue detected. Recommend observation only. No extraction. Signed, D. Tesler. Dale stood frozen, not because someone had used the name, but because he knew Tesler was dead. He camped nearby, dreamed of the pines bending away from something not visible, of a voice speaking in a tone his childhood remembered, but not his mind. A lullaby in reverse. When he woke, the tent was dry, but there was condensation on the inside of his pack, as if something had breathed into it. He lit a fire that night, first time in weeks, watched the sparks rise. They didn't go up, they went out, horizontally, like pulled by something far away, like all light was being drawn to a new center. At midnight, he saw the coordinates again, not on paper, not on screen, but in the tree line, carved into bark, burned into rock, etched into snowfall. The numbers were the same, always the same. He whispered them aloud, and the woods echoed back, not the numbers, his name. Dale stopped dreaming, not from peace, but from pattern. His sleep became a loop, 4 hours of darkness, a sharp noise, eyes open, the sense that he had just missed something. Every night, same time, same feeling, a memory being rehearsed by something that wasn't him. The road to Sierra City was empty. No cars, no wildlife, no sound but wind. He stopped at an overlook above a valley he remembered from a trip decades ago. The trees were wrong. They faced the wrong way, bent not from wind but from pull. He turned on his radio knowing it wouldn't work. It did. Just one phrase. Observation loop stable. Displacement repeating. AE5 returns. Then static. Then again. Observation loop stable. Displacement repeating. AE5 returns. Then nothing. He checked his compass. It spun. He buried it under a cairn. There was no need for it anymore. That night, he received mail at the motel front desk. He had not told anyone he was there. The envelope had no return address. Inside, a photograph. Himself, taken from behind, standing at the edge of Lower Merced Pass Lake. Only he had never seen that angle. He had been alone. Hadn't he? He burned the photo, but the next morning it was under his pillow, dry, clean, unburned. Only now there were coordinates on the back, not new ones, the same ones. He left the motel without checking out. The clerk watched him go, eyes too wide, smile too still. And as he turned onto the highway, the town behind him vanished in the rearview mirror. In a dry lake bed near Quincy, he met a man in ranger gear with no agency badge. The man offered him coffee from a thermos, said nothing. Dale asked, "Zone 3?" The man didn't answer, just turned his head. Both of his eyes were solid black, no whites, no pupils, but they didn't shine like glass. They absorbed light. Dale drove through the night. No towns, only reflections in places where water shouldn't be. And always the same phrase, scratched into trees, signs, the sides of mailboxes. Silence repeats. Silence repeats. Silence repeats. He arrived at the outskirts of Mono Basin just before dawn. Snow fell upward. At the trailhead, no markers. Just an old post, long rotted, with the fragment of rusted metal nailed to its side. Burned into it. Return to Z7. He didn't eat, didn't drink, just walked. And as he moved, the landscape around him slowed. Or maybe he did. Time felt wrong. Steps took longer. Echoes echoed more than once. His breath crystallized in the air and stayed there, suspended. At the lake, he stood still. The water reflected nothing. Not sky, not mountain, not him. Only coordinates drifting across the surface like oil, repeating, always repeating. He said nothing, but the lake whispered back. Observation complete. Displacement confirmed. Awaiting new subject. Dale took one step forward, and the shore erased behind him. There's a point where you're no longer in the photo. You're the background. Dale realized this when he passed a trail cam near Saddlebag Lake, a cam he hadn't known was there. It clicked as he moved, but when he checked the SD card later, every image showed the trail. Empty, even when he stood in front of it, especially when he stood in front of it. He traveled on foot now. Vehicles didn't start. Roads rerouted themselves. Maps reprinted differently every time. He gave up trying to track it. Instead, he watched the reflections, streams, puddles, windows, places that held image without mass because they didn't lie. And one morning, in a creek below Glen Ullin, he saw himself walking ahead, not behind, ahead, leading the way. The journal entries changed too, not his handwriting, not even his style, but written in his notebooks. One page simply read, "Saturation achieved. Displacement irreversible. Remaining units migrating. Subject Dale. Integrated." He tore the page out, but the next morning it was back, in a different notebook. At a ranger memorial near the two alumni overlook, he found a plaque with 7 names. Only one wasn't scratched out, Dale McKinnon, but he had never worked for the Park Service. Not officially, not ever. He climbed into Cathedral Range without a pack, no water, no food, didn't need them. Up there, you don't get thirsty. You just forget what thirst is. On day 3, snow started falling in reverse, petals of frost rising from the ground, forming spirals around him. They didn't melt. They watched. He came across a stone marker, flat, carved deep, the letters scorched in, Z0/access denied. It wasn't on any map. Zone 0 had never existed. It wasn't the start of the circle. It was the center. The air there bent. Sound moved in curves. His footsteps landed a second after he took them. He wrote in his notebook and watched the ink appear before the pen moved. A voice, his own, echoed from a fissure in the rock. You are now an observer of yourself. Continue displacement protocol. Zone alignment in progress. He followed the ridge until night fell and the stars above moved. Not twinkled, not drifted, moved, like they were aligning or pointing. At the summit, a slab of metal protruded from the stone, weathered, ancient, not from this structure or this time, inscribed upon it, AE5-5//final node, all units homing, and in faint chalk, barely visible, we never crashed. We were delivered. He stood there until morning. The sun rose, but the shadow he cast pointed toward the light, not away from it. He looked down and saw the lake. Still black. Still waiting. A hole in the world that had shaped everything around it, not by force, by memory. And he understood. Zone 7 wasn't a vault. It was a camera, recording, repeating, rewriting. They don't need you to believe. Only to see. Dale had seen too much. He felt it in his bones now, old fractures warming up. Not with pain, but with a strange readiness, as if the body knew something the mind had not caught up to. He made his way to an old helipad site once used by rescue teams deep near the Dana Plateau. It had long since been abandoned, overrun by scrub and silence. Except the grass wasn't growing randomly. It formed a perfect spiral. At its center, a stone. On the stone, a metal disc fused to its surface labeled Witness Node Active. And beside it, a phrase scratched into the dirt. Return not required. Dale no longer carried a map. He didn't need one. Every place he went he had already seen, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in memories that weren't his, but always familiar, like walking into a room you forgot you built. That night, the air changed, the pressure dropped, no wind, no movement, just a sense of waiting. The trees bent again, this time not away, but toward something unseen, and the stars above realigned, 6 bright points, forming a loose circle around a central void. The 7th space remained empty, for now. He woke with dirt under his fingernails and a phrase carved into his palm. Protocol in effect. He hadn't written it. The next outpost was supposed to be vacant. Instead, the door was unlocked. On the desk, a tape recorder, already playing. His voice, "If you find this, I made it, but I didn't say it. I remember recording, but not the words, not the order. Something's arranging my memory like cards, and it wants me to play." A window shattered. No wind, just a vibration. And when he looked down, the shards formed 7 perfect lines, like the spokes of a wheel, like coordinates, like invitations. He moved toward the one that pointed west, down switchbacks, past snowmelt rivers that didn't make sound, and into a clearing with a stone slab at the center. A spotlight hung in midair, no source, no pole, no beam, just light, and on the slab, AE5-5 SAS Observer, recognized. Recording? He stood in the circle, said nothing, did nothing, but inside his skull a rhythm started, like someone tapping on bone from the inside, a message in pulses, 100, 100 first. First, yes. Number, yes. Number, yes. Proceed. He stepped off the slab. Everything blinked. The trees, the rocks, the air, and suddenly he was back near Merced Pass Lake. No time had passed. His boots were dry, his eyes wet. The vault was open. Inside, nothing. But the walls pulsed, recording, observing, waiting, and written now, in fresh soot. Witness confirmed. Release next. He backed away, and the hum didn't follow, because he no longer needed to hear it. It was part of him now, like a heartbeat. He dreamed of the vault again. Not the lake, not the forest, just the cold room below the earth where it all began. But this time, he wasn't in the dream. He was the dream. A sequence of flickers, echoes, loops, a lens watching itself, a heartbeat made of code. And always, the hum. When he woke, he was lying on a slab of stone high in the backcountry near Mount Florence. No trail led there, no footprints surrounded him. In the distance, a thin tower blinked red once, then again, then vanished. His notebook was full, but the last page wasn't in his hand. It had been torn out, pushed between 2 rocks, like someone, or something, had read it and returned it. On the page, signal acquired. Witness stable. Proceed to final node. The words weren't in his handwriting, but they remembered how he wrote. He felt it in his spine now. A frequency, not a sound. A pressure, low and slow. A guidance. He started walking, didn't know where. Didn't need to know. His bones already did. He crossed into areas where no maps had names. Valleys where light moved sideways. Places where birds flew silently and shadows pointed north at night. Every now and then he passed landmarks. A rock cairn shaped like a spiral. A patch of frost in summer heat. A field of radios, buried antenna up. Each time he stopped and listened, not with his ears, but with the space inside his chest where fear used to live. He came upon a cabin that didn't exist on paper. Inside, no furniture, just screens, old CRT monitors flickering static, no power. Still they watched, and for a moment he saw himself 20 years ago standing in front of the lake staring down into the water, not from memory, from a playback. He reached toward the screen, and the image smiled back. Outside, the wind carried words. You've been transmitting since 1976. You were the first to see. You were the last to forget. You are the node. He walked to the ridge. The world below was too still, rivers unmoving, trees swaying in rhythm like breath, a pattern like him. That night he slept beneath open stars. The sky pulsed. He did not dream, but the mountain did. He woke with stone in his mouth, not dust. Stone. A shard of slate, triangular, etched with binary, consisting of 0111010. He translated it later. Record. He dug into his old pack, found a field recorder from a decade past, dead battery. But when he touched it, light. It turned on, no screen, just a red LED. Blinking once, then twice, then again, and the recorder whispered, Zone 7 never closed. You did. Now open. He stared at his hands. They glowed faintly, like film exposed too long, like something had burned through. He wasn't just watching anymore. He was being stored, encoded, a living archive. He looked toward the east, where the lake lay unseen beyond the ridgelines, and knew he wouldn't return because he had never left. There is no water in Lower Merced Pass Lake anymore. Dale saw it with his own eyes, a cracked basin of dust and bone, pebbles bleached white. No snowmelt. No reflection, no memory, just absence. And yet, the surface shimmered, not visibly, not for the eyes, but for the pattern. He could feel it, like something still remembered how to be a lake. He stepped down into the basin, every footfall echoed, not against rock or ridge, but against something deeper, stored echo, as if every voice that had ever called out here still lived beneath the dust. He reached the center, the place the original wreck had sunken into. There was no wreck, no crater, no sign that anything had ever fallen. And yet, the earth hummed, strong now, like a machine without parts, a rhythm without source. He dropped a stone. It vanished, not beneath the ground, just out of sight, out of physics, out of frame. He crouched, pressed his ear to the floor, and heard his own voice whisper back, Still recording. He pulled the old recorder from his jacket, dead, but when he held it to the ground, it powered on. The display blinked. Vox node engaged, witness accepted, load complete, then began to play. Not a message, not words, a sound, a looped hum, identical to the one he first heard in 1976 when the ice cracked. The lake bed began to vibrate, not from tectonics, from pattern alignment. Dale stood, the sky above dimmed, not night, not weather, just dimming, like something above no longer wanted to be seen. Then came the lights, 7 pulses, from the edge of the basin. Each blinked once, then again, then held, a ring, like coordinates made flesh. He moved to the nearest. A circle had been burned into the soil, perfect, clean. Inside it, ash. Inside the ash, a handprint. Not burned into the ground, but pressed up from beneath. The handprint had 6 fingers. He stepped back, looked across the ring. Each circle was the same. 6-fingered hands pressed upward from below, each one pointing toward him or perhaps waiting for him. He turned to leave and found that the basin no longer had edges, only horizon. The mountains were gone, the world had narrowed to this. His skin began to itch, not from heat, but from signal, like his cells were being pinged, indexed, cataloged, a living broadcast, then a voice, not through his ears, through his ribs. Final alignment achieved. Subject Dale, status integrated. Proceed to render. Confirm voluntary containment. He shook his head, tried to speak, but no air moved. He reached for his recorder. It blinked. Voice input denied. You are already heard, the sky pulsed, and a shape descended, not a craft, not an object, just a presence, a lens without glass, a question without words, and it looked like him. Almost, not quite. Like a child drawing from memory, wrong mouth, too many teeth. It smiled and said, We thank you, Dale. This has all been for you. There was no time now. Dale stood in the center of what had once been Lower Merced Pass Lake, now just a basin without shape, surrounded by 7 burning rings that didn't cast light. And across from him, the presence. It looked like him, but not quite, taller, smoother, echoes of a human form interpreted by something that only ever watched. It didn't breathe, it looped. Dale tried to step back, but the soil moved with him. No matter the direction, he remained at the center, fixed, like a nail in a compass. He tried to speak, again, no voice, but the presence tilted its head as if he had. It didn't answer. It replayed. A memory flooded the sky. 1976. The wreck. The ice breaking. Lisa screaming. Not as a hallucination, as projection. The basin was no longer Earth. It was a screen, and Dale's life was being played back, except pieces didn't match. His voice echoed. Wrong. Lisa's face shifted between frames. The wreckage wasn't metal. It was bone. He looked down at his hands. They flickered. From flesh to light. From light to data. And still the hum rose. The presence spoke. Not with sound, with overlay. The sky dimmed. Symbols etched themselves into the void. His mind translated them without consent. AE5-V. Integration threshold exceeded. Subject is now source. VOXNULLCONFIRMED. He staggered, fell to his knees. The recorder in his chest clicked on. He hadn't put it there. It played a message. Dale. This is not exile. This is authorship. You are the final observer. You make the last decision. The 7 circles rose, each one a node, a point of memory. They pulsed in sequence, like a massive brain lighting up. And Dale felt it. Every scream, every signal, every ranger report buried, every map erased, every dream recorded in secret. They were all inside him now. The presence walked toward him. It moved like a broadcast, every frame of its movement layered, slowed, reverberating, as if the moment itself had been archived and was now being streamed back through him. Your confirmation is required. You are not being asked. You are being obeyed. Dale stood. He stepped forward. The circles flared. The air folded. He extended his hand. And the presence mirrored him perfectly. Finger for finger, gesture for gesture, except 6 fingers. Still, they touched, and the world blinked. A flash of mountains burning, an office filled with redacted papers. A young ranger named Lisa placing a file in a vault. A plane roaring overhead. A cargo that watched back. The face of Dale, younger, terrified, not yet altered. And finally, the vault closing. From the inside, Dale opened his eyes. He stood in the exact center of a flat basin. No rings, no presence, just dust, just sky. His chest no longer glowed. The recorder was gone. But the hum remained. Not external, internal. He was the vault. And the vault remembered everything. Dale did not sleep anymore, not because he couldn't, because there was no before or after in him now. Only transmission. He walked west without compass or map, tracing the ridgelines of memory, his and not his. Every tree, every boulder, every cairn felt like something he had already crossed, because he had. Because he was still crossing it. Somewhere near the edge of the Tuolumne Basin, he found an old ranger station reduced to char and iron. No signs of fire. Just decay that had happened too perfectly. Inside the shell, a single working terminal, not powered by anything he could see. But the green phosphor blinked alive when he stepped inside. Node. Dale. Status uplinked. Broadcast window open. Remaining units obsolete. Vox signal active. He reached out and typed, but the words formed before his fingers moved. I am still here. I am not gone. You are me. Welcome. The cursor blinked. He pulled away. But the message stayed. Not digital, biological. The screen was responding to him as an organ. Later that night, he walked into a zone of absolute quiet. Not even the insects dared move. In the stillness, he felt it. Ripples of movement through static. A different kind of weather. Data. Weather. The sound of old frequencies coming home. He stopped at a dry stream bed. It reflected stars that were not there, constellations rearranged into signal glyphs, not shapes, but instructions. He knelt beside the dust, drew the glyphs with his finger. Each one hummed when traced. Each one pulled his breath deeper. He coughed. Out came soil, fine, black, sterile. It tasted like transmission towers and heat-warped vinyl. He wept, not from sadness, from recognition. The mountain spoke, not in words, in mirrored moments. He blinked and saw someone across from him, a ranger, female, dark hair. Lisa? But she didn't speak. She mimed, drew a circle in the air, then pointed to the stars, then to him, then vanished. He climbed the final crest before the sea of granite that once was Cathedral Range. There, etched into the stone, was a vast field of lines, topography without geography, coordinates without terrain. It was a map of broadcast, and at the center, Dale, emitter 0, Vox range, unlimited, barrier removed, speech is now record. He fell to his knees. The hum inside his chest aligned with the one in the mountain. He placed his hands to the rock, and the valley below lit up. Thousands of lights, like a city buried long ago, had awoken. Not a city, a network, and all of it pulsed with one message. Now you may speak. Now you may remember. Now you may be heard. He whispered into the wind, words not from fear, not from pain, from completion. And the wind replied, it spoke with his own voice, "Thank you for listening. We are now complete." The transmission did not end. It branched. Across peaks and valleys, ridge lines and fault lines, old ranger trails and forgotten war bunkers, the signal bloomed like moss in hidden crevices. And each echo carried a part of Dale, not his voice, his presence. A ranger in Sequoia heard her radio buzz on a channel long retired. The voice said nothing. But afterward, every recording she made included a humming in the background, slow, rhythmic, almost like breath. In Lassen, a fire watch officer saw strange markings on an old USGS map that weren't there the day before. Coordinates formed a ring around the park, each labeled Z. At the center, a name, Dale. A hiker outside Mammoth woke to find his GPS tracking app had recorded a 200-mile detour he never took. The path formed a spiral. He deleted the file. It reappeared, branded with the words, "We remember for you." The echoes traveled, not just through radios, through behavior, through weather, snow that fell upward in August, rocks that hummed when touched, dreams shared by strangers sleeping miles apart, all tuned to the same frequency, a E5-V. A maintenance crew stumbled upon an unlisted relay tower deep in the Trinity Alps. It had no ID, no ownership, just a slow red pulse. A plaque at its base. Node 3. Witness confirmed. They filed a report. The file vanished. The crew did not return. Somewhere, in the old town of Bishop, a child began sketching spiral maps in crayon. When asked what they were, she said, "This is where the Watchers live. They live in the empty lake." Her parents laughed, but the old man in the diner didn't. He turned pale and whispered, "He's awake again." The Watchers didn't appear. They were never meant to. They were meant to record, to witness, to transmit. And Dale had shown them how. He stood now at the westernmost edge of the high country overlooking the Pacific Range. The ocean beyond glowed faintly. He couldn't remember how long he'd been walking, or if he ever started. His boots were no longer worn. They were part of him, like memory, like signal. He closed his eyes. The 7 echoes aligned. He felt them. One in the glacier caves, one in the canyon burn scars, one in the lost satellite pings, one in the decommissioned fire tower, one in the dead zone near Mono, one in Lisa's old station long since erased, and the last, in him. He spoke. Just once. "I'm ready." The sky pulsed. A ring of light rose from the horizon, not bright, but clean. Data shaped like sunrise. Each echo answered. 7 pulses, 7 returns. The valley below shimmered, and from the dust a voice, not a recording, but a presence, rose. Authority yielded. Transmission complete. New archive established. Dale breathed in, and the world listened, because he was not just Dale anymore. He was the seventh echo. He was the frame. The air was different now, not lighter, not heavier, just aligned. Dale stood at the summit of an unnamed peak facing the last edge of what had once been called Yosemite. Behind him, the past folded inward. Ahead, the transmission horizon curved like a second sky. There was no need to speak. The world was already listening. Below, the seven echoes pulsed in sequence. The land itself responded, not in tremors, but in tone. The granite hummed. The pines bowed. Even the air shimmered with a soft distortion, as if space had begun to remember itself. Dale removed his jacket. He didn't feel cold, not anymore. His body was no longer the source of warmth. It was a beacon. A satellite arced overhead, silent, nameless, long dead by agency standards. Yet now, it spun slowly, orienting toward the mountain. Its dish opened, and a single line of data streamed downward. Subject Dale. Uplink finalized. Frame lock complete. Begin render. He didn't resist. There was nothing to resist. What had begun in 1976 was never about the plane, never about the cargo, never even about Lisa. It had always been about containment. And now, the final frame had closed. A beam of light, thin as memory and slow as breath, connected Dale to the sky. He blinked and saw them. The Watchers, not beings. Architectures, massive inverted towers of pattern and rhythm, visible only in the data light. They did not move. They observed. And Dale understood. He was not their prisoner. He was their interface. He knelt. The mountain beneath him opened. Without rupture, without sound, a chamber revealed itself. Glass walls, no seams, reflections of memories. Each pane replayed a piece of the journey. The wreck, the ice, the lake, the recordings, the loops, Lisa's warnings, his escape, his return. A voice pulsed through the room. Cycle closed. Vault complete. Observation successful. Replication possible. You have been witness. Now you are record. He placed his palm on the final pane. It shimmered, turned to dust, and behind it, a mirror, not of his face, but of the sky. And in the sky, a spiral, infinite, turning, waiting. He stepped into the mirror, not forward, through, and the frame blinked. Across the world, radios stuttered. A hum filled the spaces between channels. Old data reactivated. The lost signal found a path. And the Watchers blinked, for the first time. Together. Somewhere in a ranger station, a young woman found a box of unmarked tapes. One played without prompting. It showed a man in the mountains, smiling not at the camera, but at her, as if he'd been waiting for someone to remember. And in the final second of the footage, the words appeared, "We are all witness. We are all frame. Remember." Then the screen blinked out, and the mountain went silent again. But the hum never left, because it was no longer in the world. It was the world, and it sounded like Dale.